"You already took it off. Now do it," the rancher froze. Then did the unthinkable. John had always lived a quiet, steady life. His home was a small ranch tucked into the valley between rolling hills. The land was rough in places, with rocky outcrops and streams that cut through the fields, but it was beautiful in its own rugged way. The mornings were usually crisp, with the smell of wet earth and the soft warmth of sunlight spilling across the pastures. Most people in town knew John as a hardworking man. They respected him because he never complained, never asked for help unless absolutely necessary, and had a way of getting things done even when it seemed impossible. But few really knew him. Few understood the thoughts that went through his mind, the quiet fears he carried, or the depth of his courage that often went unnoticed. John's day usually started before sunrise. He would dress in thick clothes to protect against the early morning chill, pull on his boots, and head outside. His cattle were his main concern, and he knew each one by sight. There was Daisy, the gentle cow who always wandered near the barn, and Buck, the strong steer who tested his patience more than any of the others. John walked the pastures slowly, checking fences, making sure no gate was left open, and watching for signs of predators or illness among his herd. It was a simple routine, but it was also a rhythm that gave his life structure and comfort. He liked knowing that as long as he did his part, his land and his animals would thrive. One morning, as John walked the edge of a pasture near the old forest, he noticed something strange. The snow from the night before had melted in patches, revealing small, unfamiliar tracks in the soft mud. They were not from his cattle, and they were smaller than a deer's. He crouched down and studied them carefully. The tracks led toward a nearby stream and then disappeared among the trees. John frowned. He had seen foxes and coyotes in the area before, but something about these tracks made his stomach tighten. It could be nothing. Maybe an animal had wandered in from the hills. But a small part of him felt uneasy. He had learned over the years that instincts like this were worth listening to. There was often truth hidden in unease, a warning that something was about to happen, even if it wasn't obvious yet. Despite his concern, John continued with his work. He had to check the fences that ran along the northern edge of the property. The winter storms had been harsh, and he expected some damage. The wind whipped through the valley, and the cold cut through his gloves, making his fingers numb. He worked slowly, repairing broken boards and tightening loose wires, but his mind kept wandering back to those tracks. What had made them? And why did he feel that he might see it again? The questions lingered like a shadow over his otherwise calm morning. As he worked, John's thoughts drifted to the life he had chosen. Being a rancher wasn't easy. It required patience, strength, and often a willingness to face danger quietly, without recognition. He had chosen this life because it gave him freedom. He liked the idea of working with his hands, of being outside in the fresh air, of feeling connected to the land in a way most people never experienced. There was satisfaction in seeing a calf grow strong under his care, in knowing that his efforts kept his animals healthy and safe. And yet, the life he loved also demanded vigilance. One mistake, one moment of carelessness could result in loss of an animal, or worse, of something he could never replace. That thought weighed on him as he moved from one fence to the next, hammering boards and securing gates. By late morning, John had finished his repairs. He paused to look around the valley, taking in the quiet beauty of the landscape. The sky was a clear blue, and the hills were bathed in sunlight. There was a calmness in the air that seemed almost magical. Birds chirped in the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of earth and pine. For a moment, John felt a sense of peace. This was the life he had chosen. This was the world he understood and could control in ways that others could not. And yet he could not shake the feeling that something was about to interrupt the calm. The tracks, the unease in his stomach, they were reminders that life often brought unexpected challenges, even in the quietest places. John returned to the barn to check on the calves. They were playful and energetic, running in small circles, their tiny hooves making soft thuds against the straw. One of them, a little female with a light brown coat, nuzzled his hand, and he laughed softly. He had a soft spot for the calves. There was something pure about them, something that reminded him why he continued this work day after day. Caring for animals was more than a job. It was a responsibility, a connection to life that demanded his full attention. And yet he knew that responsibility often required courage. There would be times when instinct alone would not be enough, when fear had to be faced and action taken no matter the danger. He didn't know it yet, but one of those times was coming soon. After tending to the animals, John decided to take a walk near the stream where he had seen the tracks. He wanted to see if there were any signs of movement, anything that could explain the mystery. The snow melted under his boots, leaving wet impressions in the mud. He followed the path carefully, his eyes scanning for movement. The tracks reappeared briefly, then vanished again near a stand of trees. John paused, feeling the familiar tension of uncertainty. His heart beat a little faster, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had always believed that fear was a tool, not an enemy. It sharpened the senses, made him alert, and prepared him for the unexpected. And he knew that soon, that lesson would be tested in a way he could not yet imagine. By the time John returned to the main part of his ranch, the sun was higher in the sky, and the warmth of the morning had faded into a crisp afternoon. He took a moment to rest, leaning against the fence and watching his cattle graze. The world seemed quiet again, almost too quiet, and he felt that same uneasy pull in his chest. Life on a ranch was never simple, and he had learned that challenges often arrived without warning. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he felt a small spark of readiness. Experience, patience, and instinct had prepared him for difficult moments before, and they would prepare him again. The day seemed ordinary, but John's mind carried the knowledge that the ordinary could change in a heartbeat. As he walked back to the barn to finish his chores, John thought about the lessons he had learned over the years. Courage was not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it was quiet, measured, and disciplined. Sometimes it was about paying attention to small signs, about noticing tracks in the mud or changes in the wind. And sometimes it was about trusting oneself, even when fear whispered otherwise. He felt a deep connection to his land, his animals, and his way of life. He knew that the valley, the hills, and the pastures would continue to challenge him, but he also knew that he would rise to meet those challenges. The life of a rancher was not easy, but it was a life worth living, full of lessons, full of responsibility, and full of quiet, enduring courage. By evening, John had completed his chores. The sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the pastures. He stood for a moment, looking over the land he loved. The tracks he had seen earlier lingered in his thoughts, a reminder that even in the quietest places, life was never predictable. And John, steady and calm as ever, prepared himself for whatever might come next. He did not yet know the test that awaited him, but he would face it with the same quiet strength that had carried him through every day of his life. A few days after noticing the strange tracks, John woke early as usual, the sky still dark with a hint of frost in the air. The valley was quiet, and the hills seemed to glow faintly as the first hints of sunlight touched the peaks. John had finished his morning chores, feeding the animals, checking fences, and ensuring the water troughs were full. Despite the calm morning, a subtle tension lingered in his mind. The tracks from a few days ago kept coming back to him. There was something about them he couldn't shake, a feeling that the quiet life he had known might soon be interrupted. Just as he was finishing up, his phone rang. It was not often that John received calls. Most neighbors preferred face-to-face conversations, and news usually traveled slowly in the valley. But the voice on the other end was urgent and strained. It was Henry, a fellow rancher who lived a few miles down the road. "John, I need your help. There's a calf, it's on the pond. The ice is thin, I don't know what to do." John's stomach tightened. His mind immediately raced through the possibilities. Thin ice was dangerous, unpredictable, and he had seen accidents happen before. But he also knew that calves were vulnerable creatures. They had no idea how to navigate danger, and every second mattered if the animal was to survive. Without hesitation, John grabbed his coat, boots, and a long rope he kept in his truck for emergencies. His hands moved quickly, but there was a steady rhythm to his actions, a practiced precision that came from years of ranch work. The drive to Henry's ranch was tense. The dirt roads were rough, covered with patches of ice and mud from the recent thaw. John's truck bounced over small rocks, tires slipping occasionally, but he pressed forward. The wind bit at his face through the open window, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine. He thought about the calf and the ice. What would it feel like to be trapped on thin ice, unable to move, struggling in freezing water? The thought made his heart beat faster. He had faced challenges before, but nothing quite like this. When he arrived at the pond, a small crowd had gathered along the banks. Henry and a few neighbors were shouting instructions, but their voices were lost in the cold wind. In the center of the pond, a young calf stood trembling, legs spread wide to keep balance on the cracking ice. Every movement caused the surface to groan and ripple, making the situation even more dangerous. The calf's brown coat was wet from the thin layer of water on the ice, and its small eyes were wide with fear. John took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Panic would not help here. He needed focus, precision, and courage. As John stepped closer to the edge of the pond, he felt his chest tighten. The ice looked fragile under his boots, and the thought of falling through made him freeze for a moment. He could see the calf struggling, splashing water around its hooves, and he knew time was running out. His mentor's words suddenly echoed in his mind, words from long ago that he had almost forgotten. "You already took it off, now do it." The phrase had always been about commitment, about following through even when fear tried to stop him, and now it applied more than ever. He could step back, leave the calf to its fate, and keep himself safe, or he could act. John adjusted his footing carefully, testing each step as he moved onto the ice. Every creak and groan of the surface made him flinch, but he forced himself to move forward. He held the rope tightly, planning to loop it around the calf and pull it toward the shore. His boots slipped occasionally, sending small shivers up his spine, but he steadied himself with a deep breath. He reminded himself that panic was a choice, and he would not choose it now. The calf's life depended on his courage and quick thinking. The calf noticed him and froze. Its small body trembled, and its eyes locked onto John's. There was fear there, raw and unfiltered, but also a flicker of trust. Somehow, the animal seemed to sense that help had arrived. John carefully threw one end of the rope toward the calf, and it awkwardly stepped closer. Every movement made the ice crack, sending thin lines radiating outward. John's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He moved slowly, speaking in a low, steady voice to the calf, trying to reassure it as much as possible. A sudden crack split the air. The ice under John's knees gave way slightly, sending a cold shock through his body. He froze for a second, feeling the icy water lap at his legs. Panic tried to rise, but he pushed it down. He adjusted his position and reached for the rope again, looping it around the calf's body. The animal struggled, slipping slightly, but John held firm. His muscles burned from the tension, and the cold bit into him like needles, but he refused to let go. Every second mattered. He thought about all the animals he had saved before, all the times he had faced danger quietly, and he drew strength from that memory. The neighbors on the shore watched, holding their breath. Some whispered prayers, others offered shouts of encouragement, but John barely noticed. His mind was focused entirely on the task at hand. He inched backward carefully, dragging the calf toward a slightly thicker patch of ice near the shore. The ice groaned and cracked with every step, making it clear how delicate this rescue truly was. John's hands were numb, his boots soaked, but he kept moving. He knew that fear could freeze the mind, but action would save the day. Halfway across, a large crack formed under the calf's feet, and it slid slightly toward the water. John reacted immediately, dropping to his knees and using his weight to stabilize the rope. He pulled with all his strength, feeling the strain in his arms and shoulders. The ice quivered beneath them, threatening to give way entirely, but John refused to panic. He had faced challenges before, but this was unlike anything he had experienced. It required every ounce of focus, courage, and patience he could summon. Minutes passed like hours. The calf slipped and slid, but John never let go. He encouraged the animal with gentle words, his own voice shaking slightly from the cold and tension. He thought about the lessons of his life, the importance of persistence, the quiet strength that comes from facing fear, and the knowledge that some challenges could not be avoided, only met with courage. This was one of those challenges. He could not turn away. He could not hesitate. Every instinct told him to act, and he acted with everything he had. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, John reached the edge of the thicker ice near the shore. He anchored himself carefully, looping the rope securely around a tree branch. With a final pull, he dragged the calf from the fragile ice onto solid ground. Both of them collapsed, exhausted, shivering, and soaked, but alive. The neighbors erupted in cheers, running forward to help, but John barely noticed. He sat for a moment, catching his breath, watching the calf tremble on the safe ground. Relief washed over him in a quiet, heavy wave. He had faced fear and he had acted. As the calf was tended to and blankets were brought to dry it, John reflected on what had just happened. Fear had almost frozen him, had almost stopped him from doing what needed to be done. But action had won over hesitation. The words from his mentor, "You already took it off, now do it," resonated deeply. It was a reminder that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the choice to act in spite of it. The day had tested him in a way he could never have anticipated, but it had also reminded him of the quiet power of determination and skill. By the time John returned to his ranch, the sun was higher, casting warm light over the valley. His clothes were soaked and his body was numb, but there was a sense of satisfaction in his movements. He had faced a true challenge, one that required him to push past instinct and fear, and he had succeeded. The valley seemed quieter than ever, almost as if it was acknowledging his efforts, and John knew that life on a ranch was filled with moments like this, moments where courage, patience, and presence of mind mattered more than anything else. That evening, John sat by the fire in his small cabin, warming his frozen hands and sipping hot tea. He replayed the rescue in his mind, thinking about every step, every choice, and every second that had mattered. The valley was calm, the hills bathed in the soft glow of twilight, and yet he felt a subtle energy within himself, a renewed respect for the fragility of life and the strength that came from acting in the face of fear. He did not see himself as a hero. He saw himself as a man who had done what was necessary, and in that quiet reflection, he understood something important. Courage was not about grand gestures, applause, or recognition. Courage was about meeting life's challenges, even when they seemed impossible, and moving forward one step at a time. The following morning dawned cold and crisp. Frost clung to the grass and a thin mist hovered above the valley, giving the hills an ethereal glow. John woke early as he always did, but his mind was restless. The events at the pond still lingered vividly in his thoughts. He could replay every detail, the trembling calf, the cracking ice, the icy water soaking through his clothes. He knew he had been lucky, but luck had little to do with it. It was focus, courage, and quick thinking that had saved the calf, and yet he felt something shifting inside him. He sensed that life on the ranch could be peaceful, routine, and steady, but it could also demand moments of pure courage that tested everything he thought he knew about himself. After breakfast, John went outside to check on the cattle. The herd moved slowly across the frost-covered pastures, their breath visible in the cold air. The calves were playful, hopping and running between their mothers, but John's mind kept wandering back to the ice. He remembered the moment when his knees had nearly broken through the surface, the rush of panic that had surged through him, and the deep instinct that had forced him to act. He realized that moment had taught him something more than just survival. It had shown him the raw power of presence, of paying attention to every detail, of trusting both skill and instinct. As he walked toward the far field, John noticed a faint sound in the distance, a low, continuous crackling that didn't belong to the wind or the trees. He stopped and listened, his heart skipping a beat. His experience as a rancher told him that nature was full of warning signs, and the sound didn't feel right. Moving carefully, he followed it, keeping an eye on the ground and the surrounding trees. The sound grew louder as he approached a small, partially frozen pond at the edge of the property. He froze in place. The ice glimmered in the early light, fragile and unpredictable, and he could see the faint impression of footprints along the edges. Something had been here recently. Something, or someone. John's instincts screamed caution, but he also knew he couldn't ignore it. Life on the ranch was about observing, anticipating, and acting when necessary. He stepped slowly to the edge of the pond, testing the ice with a long branch. Each step made the ice groan and shiver beneath him. He felt a chill run through his body, not just from the cold, but from the weight of responsibility. He remembered the calf he had saved a few days before and the urgency of that rescue. He realized that courage was not a single act, but a series of decisions, each requiring presence, patience, and awareness. Suddenly, he heard a faint cry. His heart leapt. Moving closer, he spotted a young calf struggling near the center of the pond, its legs spread wide on the cracking ice. The animal had somehow wandered onto the frozen surface overnight, perhaps chasing a bird or following its curiosity. It was small, frightened, and completely unaware of the danger it faced. John's stomach tightened, and a surge of fear ran through him. He knew the ice could give way at any moment. One wrong step, one sudden movement, and both he and the calf could be in danger. He took a deep breath and tried to steady his racing heart. He remembered the words that had guided him before. "You already took it off, now do it." It was not just about the physical act of stepping onto the ice. It was about committing to the responsibility, facing fear, and acting decisively despite the danger. He adjusted his boots, held the rope tightly in one hand, and began moving forward. Every step made the ice shiver beneath him. His muscles burned from tension, but he forced himself to focus on each movement, on the rope, on the fragile connection between him and the animal he had to save. The calf noticed him and froze in fear. Its eyes widened, reflecting panic, and it trembled violently. John spoke in a calm, low voice, trying to reassure it. "It's okay, I'm here, stay still, we'll get you out." The calf shifted slightly, and the ice groaned ominously. John paused, testing the surface, calculating his next move. Every detail mattered: the thickness of the ice, the angle of his steps, the position of the rope, the calf's movements. One miscalculation could be disastrous. He extended the rope toward the calf, looping it carefully around its body. The calf resisted at first, struggling against the unfamiliar sensation, but John remained calm. He knew that panic could worsen the situation. He spoke gently, coaxing the animal, reassuring it with soft words and steady hands. The ice beneath them creaked louder, a warning that time was running out. John adjusted his stance, lowering himself closer to the surface to distribute his weight more evenly. Every motion was deliberate, every choice critical. Then suddenly the ice cracked sharply beneath him. Cold water splashed onto his knees, sending a shock through his body. He froze for a moment, heart pounding, but he pushed the fear aside. There was no time for hesitation. With careful precision, he pulled the calf closer, dragging it toward a slightly thicker area of ice near the shore. The animal's movements were erratic, making the rescue even more challenging. John's hands were numb, his arms burning from effort, but he refused to give up. He knew that courage was not about feeling invincible. It was about acting even when everything in you screamed to retreat. Minutes felt like hours as he slowly edged the calf across the treacherous ice. Each step required focus, each movement required control. The neighbors who had arrived on the shore were shouting, offering advice, but John could barely hear them over the pounding of his heart. His entire being was focused on the task at hand. He thought about the years of experience he had gained, the countless small moments that had prepared him for this crisis. And he realized that all that knowledge, all that preparation, was only valuable if he could act decisively in the moment. A sudden crack formed under the calf's feet, and it slid dangerously toward the water. John reacted instinctively, dropping to his knees and shifting his weight to stabilize the rope. He pulled with all his strength, straining against the slipping animal, feeling the ice groan and tremble beneath them. The cold was biting, the wind whipping against his face, but he refused to panic. He spoke to the calf, keeping his voice steady, encouraging it, soothing it, guiding it inch by inch toward safety. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he reached the thicker ice near the shore. He anchored himself securely and carefully pulled the calf onto solid ground. Both of them collapsed, trembling from the cold and exhaustion, but alive. Relief washed over John in a quiet wave. The neighbors rushed forward to help, but he barely noticed. The immediate danger had passed, but the lesson of courage, focus, and presence lingered deeply within him. As the calf was wrapped in blankets and tended to, John reflected on the rescue. Fear had almost frozen him. The cold, the ice, the uncertainty, it could have paralyzed him. But instead he had acted. Every decision, every step, every adjustment mattered. Courage, he realized, was not a single dramatic gesture. It was a sequence of deliberate choices, each demanding focus, skill, and commitment. And sometimes it required facing one's deepest fears head-on, trusting instinct and experience to guide the way. By the time John returned to his cabin, the sun was high in the sky. He removed his wet clothes, warmed his hands by the fire, and sipped hot tea. He replayed the events over and over in his mind, analyzing each step, each decision, and each moment of fear he had overcome. The valley outside was calm, the hills bathed in sunlight, and yet he knew that life on the ranch could change in an instant. He had seen it firsthand. Danger was never far away, and courage was never optional. That night, as he lay in bed, John thought about the thin line between fear and action, between hesitation and courage. The rescue had tested him in ways he had never imagined. It had reminded him that life demanded vigilance, patience, and strength, not just physical strength, but mental and emotional resilience as well. The valley was quiet, the stars twinkling above, and John finally felt a deep, satisfied exhaustion. He had faced one of the most challenging moments of his life and emerged not only victorious, but also wiser. Courage, he realized, was not about being fearless. It was about acting despite fear, about stepping forward when the world seemed to ask you to step back, and about embracing responsibility when life demanded it most. The day began like any other on the ranch, with frost clinging to the grass and the soft glow of morning light. Spreading across the valley, John had spent a restless night thinking about the events at the pond. Even though the calf had been safe, he knew how close disaster had come. The fragile ice, the trembling animal, the cold water that had nearly overwhelmed him, all of it lingered in his mind. He realized that life could demand more than just caution or skill. Sometimes it demanded an act so daring that it seemed almost impossible. And today, it was about to demand exactly that. John had barely finished his morning chores when a loud shout echoed across the valley. He turned toward the direction of the sound and saw Henry running toward him, panic etched on his face. "John, the calf, it's out again. It's back on the ice, and it's worse this time. The snowstorm last night weakened the pond even more." John's heart skipped a beat. A snowstorm had covered the ice overnight, masking its fragile spots and making it almost impossible to see where it might give way. He could already see thin patches and cracks forming beneath the pale layer of snow. The calf was tiny, fragile, and terrified, standing on a dangerous sheet of ice that could collapse at any moment. Without thinking, John grabbed his coat and a long rope. His hands moved quickly, but his mind was sharp, calculating every possible risk. He knew he could not wait for help. There was none that could arrive in time. The calf's survival depended entirely on his actions. As he approached the pond, he could hear the ice creaking ominously under the calf's small hooves. The wind carried a chill that bit through his clothes, but he barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the animal and the treacherous surface it stood upon. The first step onto the ice sent a shiver up John's spine. He could feel the cold water seeping into his boots through cracks in the surface. The ice groaned under his weight, each step sounding like a warning. The calf froze, sensing both danger and the presence of someone who might help. John's hands were numb from the cold, but he gripped the rope tightly, looping it carefully to guide the calf without causing it to panic. He moved slowly, calculating each step, aware that one misstep could send both of them plunging into the freezing water. Then it happened. A loud crack split the air as a section of ice beneath the calf gave way. The animal slipped, its hooves flailing, and a wave of icy water surged toward John's knees. He froze for a split second, feeling the cold shock run through his body. The instinct to retreat was strong, almost overwhelming, but he forced himself forward. There was no time to hesitate. With every ounce of strength he had, he grabbed the calf, holding it tightly against his chest. The ice groaned violently, threatening to break beneath him entirely. John's heart pounded. The neighbors watching from the shore shouted in alarm, but their voices were distant, almost drowned out by the roar of his own thoughts. John shifted his weight carefully, lowering himself as much as possible to spread his body across the ice and reduce pressure on any single point. The calf struggled, kicking and slipping, but John spoke softly, coaxing it with steady words. "It's okay, I've got you. Just stay calm, we'll be out soon." His muscles burned with effort, and the cold seeped through his clothes like fire in reverse, numbing his hands and legs. Every movement was a test of strength, balance, and courage. He realized that the act he was performing now, the daring rescue on the fragile ice, was something few people would ever attempt. The ice beneath him shifted suddenly, creating a dangerous gap. Cold water surged around his knees and thighs, making it nearly impossible to stay balanced. John could feel panic pressing at the edges of his mind, but he refused to give it power. He had faced fear before, but this was different. This was not about risk measured by distance or time. This was life and death in real terms. One wrong step, one hesitation, and both he and the calf could be lost. He adjusted the rope, repositioned the calf, and inched toward a slightly thicker section of ice that appeared to be near the shore. Every step felt like walking on glass that could shatter at any moment. The neighbors on the shore watched with wide eyes. Some whispered prayers, others shouted warnings, but John barely registered them. His focus was absolute. The calf's life depended on his every decision, and he understood that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the mastery of it, the ability to act decisively when the stakes were highest. He could feel his body trembling from the cold and effort, but he pushed through, each movement deliberate, each choice careful. The ice continued to groan under him, and the sound reminded him how fragile everything was. Suddenly, a large crack appeared just beneath him. Water surged up to his waist as the ice began to give way more rapidly. The calf panicked, slipping toward the open water. John's heart raced, and for a moment he froze, not with fear but with the realization of what had to be done. Acting instinctively, he dropped to his stomach, spreading his weight as wide as possible, and extended the rope to loop securely around the calf. The ice trembled, threatening to collapse entirely, but John held firm, his strength and determination keeping both of them from plunging into the freezing water. The calf struggled violently, slipping and thrashing in the icy water that had begun to seep through the cracks. John pulled it close, his own body trembling with cold and effort, and slowly, inch by inch, he dragged the animal toward the thicker ice near the shore. Each movement was agonizingly slow, the tension unbearable, but he refused to give in to fear. He whispered words of reassurance, though his voice was barely audible over the groaning ice and rushing water. "Almost there. You're going to be okay. Stay with me." The neighbors had begun forming a human chain along the shore, ready to grab the rope and help once John reached safety. Their presence, though distant, gave him a faint sense of support, but he knew that the final effort depended entirely on his own courage and skill. The ice beneath him continued to crack and shift, sending small waves of freezing water around his body. His muscles ached, his hands were numb, and his clothes were soaked through, but he refused to stop. The calf's life was more important than comfort, warmth, or safety. Finally, John reached the slightly thicker ice near the shore. He anchored himself carefully against a solid tree branch, wrapping the rope securely. With a final, powerful pull, he dragged the calf onto the solid ground. Both of them collapsed in a heap, shivering and exhausted. Relief washed over John in a heavy, quiet wave. The neighbors rushed forward to help, offering blankets, warm water, and words of encouragement, but John barely noticed. The immediate danger had passed, and the lesson of courage, presence, and perseverance lingered deeply within him. As the calf was wrapped in blankets and tended to, John finally allowed himself a deep breath. He reflected on the act he had just performed, the unthinkable rescue on fragile ice that could have ended in disaster. Fear had been present at every step, threatening to paralyze him, but he had acted. Each decision, each careful movement, each moment of focus had mattered. Courage, he realized, was not about heroism or recognition. It was about choosing to act in the face of fear, to embrace responsibility, and to trust in skill, preparation, and instinct. By the time John returned to his cabin, the sun was high, casting warm light across the valley. He removed his wet clothes and warmed himself by the fire, thinking deeply about the events of the morning. His body was exhausted, but his mind was alive with understanding. Life on the ranch could be calm and routine, but it could also demand moments of extraordinary courage, moments where hesitation could mean disaster and where fear had to be faced head-on. John realized that these moments were not about luck. They were about choice, about the willingness to act decisively, and about the quiet strength that comes from knowing one is doing the right thing. As evening fell, the valley quieted. John sat by the fire, sipping hot tea and watching the flames dance. The calf, now warm and safe, rested nearby, its small breath steady. John reflected on what he had learned. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was mastery of it. Strength was not just physical, it was mental and emotional. And responsibility was not something to be taken lightly. It demanded action, sometimes in ways that seemed impossible. The day had tested him more than anything before, but it had also reminded him of the quiet, enduring power of human determination and presence of mind. The stars appeared in the sky, twinkling over the valley, and John felt a deep, peaceful exhaustion. The world could be fragile, dangerous, and unpredictable, but he had faced one of its greatest challenges and emerged wiser, stronger, and more aware of what courage truly meant. The pond, the ice, and the trembling calf would remain in his memory as a moment when fear, determination, and action had collided, and when the unthinkable had been achieved. The valley was quiet the morning after the rescue. A soft layer of frost covered the fields, and the sun rose slowly, casting a warm glow across the hills. John moved slowly around his ranch, carrying out his usual chores, but everything felt different. The events of the previous day weighed on his mind, lingering like a shadow mixed with light. He had faced fear, cold, and danger in a way he never had before. He had acted when hesitation could have been safer, and in doing so, he had saved a life. Yet as he worked, he realized that the lessons went far deeper than the rescue itself. The calf, now safely in the barn, huddled under warm blankets. It had recovered quickly, its small eyes bright and alert, a stark contrast to the terrified animal John had saved on the ice. As he watched it nibble on some hay, John felt a quiet pride, but not in the way most people think of pride. This was a calm, reflective pride, the kind that comes from knowing you faced fear, took responsibility, and did what was right. The valley, the hills, and the cattle continued their routines, but John knew that life had shown him a new layer of understanding, one that could not be ignored. John walked outside to check the fences and pastures. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. Birds sang quietly from the trees, and the valley seemed to exhale in calm. But John felt a small tension in his chest, a reminder that life could shift in an instant. He remembered the crack of ice, the rush of freezing water, the calf's panicked movements, and he understood that courage was not a single moment of heroism. Courage was a series of decisions, deliberate and unwavering, taken when the mind screamed to hesitate. It was knowing the risk, feeling the fear, and still choosing to act. That realization stayed with him, steady and grounding, like the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Neighbors had come by to check on the calf and to thank John for his bravery. They spoke softly, not fully knowing what words to use for an event so tense, so frightening. They told him how the ice had looked dangerous, how they had feared for his life, how they had admired his courage. But John listened quietly, nodding without much response. Words felt unnecessary. The lesson he carried was not for recognition. It was for understanding himself, his limits, and his capacity to act when circumstances demanded. He knew that admiration, though kind, was secondary to the experience itself. The true victory was survival, awareness, and the knowledge that action, however frightening, could make a difference. Later in the day, John walked along the edge of the pond. The ice had melted in patches from the morning sun, and the water shimmered with reflections of the sky. He knelt near the shore, tracing his hand along the cold water, and thought about how fragile life could be. The valley was calm now, almost deceptively so, but yesterday had reminded him how quickly the ordinary could shift to the extraordinary. The calf had wandered onto the ice, he had reacted, and the result had been life-saving. He understood now that every choice mattered, every moment held consequence, and every step forward required responsibility. Life demanded action, sometimes in moments that seemed impossible. John thought about his own fears, the hesitation he had felt, the instinct to pull back when the ice had cracked beneath him. He realized that fear was not weakness. It was natural, a signal meant to sharpen the senses, to demand caution. But he also knew that fear without action was powerless. Action gave fear purpose, transformed it into courage, and allowed him to do what needed to be done. That understanding stayed with him as he walked back to the barn, the crisp wind on his face, and the soft sounds of cattle in the distance grounding him in reality. The calf was now eating steadily, its small body warming under the blankets. John knelt beside it and gently stroked its coat. "You're safe now," he whispered. "Everything is going to be okay." He thought about the long hours of danger, the moment when the ice had cracked, and the sheer effort it had taken to save this small life. The animal had been entirely dependent on him, completely vulnerable, and he had acted decisively. It was a humbling reminder that life was not just about survival. It was about responsibility, empathy, and the willingness to do what was right, even at personal risk. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, John took a walk through the pastures. The valley was alive with subtle movements. A deer crossing quietly in the distance, birds darting between the trees, the wind rippling through the grass. He felt a sense of connection, a deep awareness that every living thing depended on choices, vigilance, and courage. His rescue of the calf had shown him the intensity of that dependence, the fragile balance between risk and safety. It had also taught him that even in moments of extreme danger, calm, deliberate action could turn the tide. Later that evening, John sat by the fire in his small cabin, the warmth soothing his still-chilled body. He sipped hot tea, reflecting on everything that had happened. The calf was resting peacefully nearby, the sound of its gentle breathing a reminder of the day's victory. He thought about the thin line between fear and courage, hesitation and action, safety and risk. He realized that life would always present challenges, and that the measure of a person was not whether they avoided danger, but whether they faced it when necessary. Courage was quiet, steady, and deliberate. It was not about glory, it was about choice. John looked out the window at the valley, watching the sun set behind the hills. The world seemed calm again, but he knew that it had not changed, only his perception had. The events of the day had opened a deeper understanding of life's fragility, the importance of presence, and the power of decisive action. He understood that every living thing, human, animal, or otherwise, depended on attentiveness and care. Even the smallest act of courage could make a difference, sometimes in ways that seemed impossible to anticipate. As night fell, John stepped outside briefly, feeling the cold air against his face. The stars twinkled above, bright and steady, and the valley was silent except for the faint rustle of trees in the wind. He felt a quiet sense of completion, a calm knowledge that he had faced one of the most intense moments of his life and emerged not only victorious but wiser. He thought about the calf, the fragile ice, and the sharp fear that had threatened to freeze him in place. And he realized that courage was not the absence of fear. It was the ability to act despite it, to move forward when hesitation seemed safer, and to embrace responsibility when life demanded it most. The neighbors visited again the next morning, bringing small gifts and kind words. They praised John for his bravery, but he listened politely, feeling a deeper understanding within himself that went beyond words. Recognition was fleeting. The lesson of courage and presence was lasting. He reflected on the day, on the moments when instinct had guided him, and on the calm decisiveness that had allowed him to succeed. These were the qualities that mattered most, not applause, not admiration, but the quiet strength of a person who understood the value of action in the face of fear. Over the following days, John continued his routine, but he carried the lessons of the rescue with him. Every step, every decision, every interaction became more deliberate. He noticed small signs in the environment, subtle changes in the herd, shifts in the weather. His awareness sharpened, not out of paranoia, but out of respect for the fragility of life and the responsibility that came with living it. He understood that courage was not a single moment but a series of choices, each demanding attention, patience, and focus. The calf thrived under his care, growing stronger each day. John often watched it play in the pastures, marveling at its energy and resilience. He felt a deep connection not only to this animal but to the land, the valley, and the rhythm of life itself. The rescue had been a defining moment, a test of courage and presence, and it had left a lasting impression on him. He understood now that life would continue to demand difficult choices, but he also knew that he had the strength, skill, and calmness to face them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the valley was bathed in the golden light of twilight, John stood outside, taking in the familiar sights. The cattle moved quietly across the pastures, the trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the pond reflected the colors of the sky. He felt a quiet gratitude for life, for the challenges that had tested him, and for the lessons that had shaped him. Courage, he realized, was not about grand gestures or recognition. It was about presence, responsibility, and the ability to act decisively when it mattered most. As night fell, John returned to the warmth of his cabin. The calf rested peacefully nearby, and the valley outside was calm and quiet. He sipped his tea slowly, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. The rescue had been dangerous, frightening, and exhausting, but it had also revealed a deep truth about life. That courage is born from action, responsibility, and trust in oneself. He understood now that moments of fear and danger were opportunities to grow, to learn, and to prove to oneself what could be accomplished. Finally, John closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the cabin and the gentle breathing of the calf lull him into a quiet sleep. The valley was peaceful, the stars shining above, and he felt a calm understanding that he had faced one of the greatest challenges of his life. He had acted decisively, embraced responsibility, and preserved life against the odds. The experience had left him wiser, stronger, and more aware of the fragile, beautiful balance that life demanded. And in that quiet moment, John felt a deep sense of completion, a satisfaction that came from knowing he had truly done what was needed, courageously, calmly, and unflinchingly.